5 years. That is exactly how long the ruthless head of the Costa Syndicate lay trapped in the dark prison of his own mind, kept alive by cold machines and the lingering fear of his subordinates. His enemies circled like starving vultures, ready to finally pull the plug. The world's top neurologists had completely given up. But miracles rarely come from doctors in pristine white coats. Sometimes they arrive in the form of an exhausted night shift cleaner with a bucket of bleach, holding a forgotten haunting lullaby on her lips, a melody that possessed the power to awaken a sleeping king and ignite a war. The 14th floor of St. Jude's Medical Center in downtown Boston did not look like a hospital. It resembled a fortress. Stepping off the private elevator required passing through 3 security checkpoints, a metal detector, and the scrutinizing glare of men whose tailored suits did poorly to hide the bulky holsters strapped to their chests. At the end of the sterile, heavily guarded hallway lay room 1401. Inside, the rhythmic mechanical hiss of a ventilator was the only sound that pierced the suffocating silence. This was the tomb of Harris Costa. At 34, Harris had been the undisputed architect of the city's underworld. He was a man who spoke softly, but commanded an empire built on shipping ports, real estate, and shadows. But for the last 5 years, he had been reduced to a fragile shell of a man, his sharp aristocratic features softened by atrophy, his dark hair threaded with premature silver. A car bomb meant to turn him to ash had instead sent him into a profound, seemingly irreversible coma. The medical charts at the foot of his bed listed his condition in clinical hopeless terms: persistent vegetative state, 0 cerebral cortex activity. To the nurses and specialists, he was a lost cause, a highly paying ghost taking up premium real estate. To his syndicate, he was a highly inconvenient deity, too alive to replace too dead to lead. Enter Rosalie Jenkins. Rosalie was 27, though the deep exhaustion etched around her hazel eyes made her look older. She was a ghost in her own right, an invisible fixture in the background of the wealthy and powerful. Clad in shapeless blue scrubs, pushing a squeaky yellow janitorial cart, Rosalie worked the graveyard shift. She wasn't there out of a passion for sanitation. She was there because the crushing weight of her younger brother's medical bills left her no choice. Leo, her brother, needed a kidney transplant, and the ruthless loan shark she had borrowed from to keep him on dialysis did not accept excuses. Rosalie's clearance to clean, room 1401, was a clerical oversight, a rare crack in the Costa family's impenetrable security. The regular cleaner had called in sick, and Rosalie had been unceremoniously handed the master keycard by a distracted supervisor. "Just mop the floors, wipe the counters, and don't look the guards in the eye," her supervisor had warned, his voice tight. "And whatever you do, don't touch the patient." As Rosalie pushed her card into the dimly lit VIP suite, for the first time she felt an involuntary shiver race down her spine. The room was massive, decorated more like a penthouse than a hospital ward, complete with rich mahogany furniture and heavy velvet curtains. In the center of it all was Harris. He didn't look like a monster. As Rosalie carefully wiped down the marble countertops with a rag, smelling sharply of lemon and bleach, she found herself glancing at him. The man the tabloids had dubbed the Devil of Boston looked remarkably peaceful, almost tragic. He had an oxygen tube taped beneath his nose and a labyrinth of IV lines snaking into his pale, bruised arms. "It must be lonely in there," Rosalie whispered to herself, wringing out her cloth in the soapy water. She wasn't supposed to speak to him. The rules were clear: get in clean, get out. But the oppressive silence of the room gnawed at her. Rosalie had spent her entire life caring for sick people, first her mother, and now Leo. She knew that silence was the enemy of the sick. It allowed the darkness to settle in. Without thinking, as she knelt to scrub a scuff mark off the pristine linoleum floor, Rosalie began to hum. It was a faint, breathy sound, barely audible over the hiss of the ventilator. It wasn't a pop song or a radio hit. It was an old, obscure Celtic lullaby her mother used to sing to her when the winter storms battered their small apartment windows. "Sleep now, the shadows fall," she sang softly, her voice carrying a melancholic, sweet timbre. "The wolves are at the door, but the fire burns bright." Over by the bed, unseen by Rosalie, the green line on Harris Costa's heart rate monitor gave a sudden violent twitch. The steady beep, beep, beep hitched, accelerating for just a fraction of a second before settling back into its slow, monotonous rhythm. Rosalie packed up her cart, oblivious to the storm she had just sparked in the silent king's mind. Deep within the abyss of his coma, Harris Costa was drowning. For 5 years, his consciousness had been trapped in a sensory deprivation tank of his own making. He existed in a suffocating void of gray mist, unable to move, unable to speak, but horrifyingly aware of the passage of time. He could occasionally hear muffled voices from the outside world, the arrogant sneers of his underbosses, the cold clinical assessments of his doctors, the weeping of his sister Rosa, which had grown more infrequent as the years dragged on. But he could not reach them. Every time he tried to claw his way out of the fog, an invisible weight crushed him back down. He was a prisoner behind his own eyelids, waiting for the day his body would finally give out and let him die. Then he heard the voice. It was faint at first, slipping through the cracks of his mental prison like a thread of pure gold. It wasn't the sterile, commanding tone of Dr. Harrison, nor the rough cigar-stained gravel of his second-in-command, Nico Romano. It was soft, feminine, and laced with a profound, aching sorrow that resonated perfectly with his own. "The fire burns bright." The melody struck a buried nerve. It was a song he hadn't heard in 30 years. It was the song his mother, an Irish immigrant who had fallen in love with a Sicilian mobster, used to sing to him when the gunshots rang out in their neighborhood. It was the last thing he heard before she was caught in the crossfire of a gang war, bleeding out on their kitchen floor while she hid him in the pantry. That lullaby was the anchor to his humanity, the only pure thing left in his blood-soaked life. And someone in the waking world was singing it. Over the next 3 weeks, Rosalie became a fixture in room 1401. The guards, a pair of hulking enforcers named Polly and Carmine, grew accustomed to the quiet, unassuming cleaner who never caused trouble. They started taking their smoke breaks down the hall when she arrived, leaving her alone with the comatose boss. Rosalie's life outside the hospital was unraveling. Leo's condition had worsened, and the loan shark, a brute named Mickey, had paid her a visit, leaving a dark purple bruise on her cheek as a reminder of her mounting debt. Cleaning Harris's room became her sanctuary. It was the only place she felt safe from the chaos of her reality, and every night as she dusted the monitors and mopped the floors, she sang the lullaby. She sang it to comfort herself, to hold back her own tears, pouring all her fear and desperation into the ancient melody. "Close your eyes, the storm will pass." Rosalie's voice wavered as she wiped down Harris's bedside table, a tear escaping and splashing onto the mahogany. "Hold my hand, the dawn will last." Dr. Harrison, the lead neurologist, was a man bought and paid for by Nico Romano. Nico, tired of waiting for the throne, had been slowly laying the groundwork to have Harris legally declared brain dead. But lately, Dr. Harrison was confused. I don't understand it," Dr. Harrison muttered to Nico one evening, standing outside the glass doors of the suite. Rosalie was hiding in the adjacent supply closet, her heart pounding as she listened through the thin vents. "What's there to understand, Doc?" Nico's voice was slick with impatience. "He's a vegetable. Sign the papers so the family can move on. Rosa doesn't have the stomach to stop us anymore." "It's his neural activity," the doctor replied, rustling through paper charts. "Between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. every night, his cerebral cortex lights up. His heart rate elevates, his blood pressure spikes. It's localized entirely to the auditory processing centers. It's almost as if he's listening to something or trying to wake up." In the closet, Rosalie clamped a hand over her mouth. 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. That was exactly when her shift brought her into room 1401. Fix it! Nico growled, his tone dropping to a lethal whisper. I've spent 5 years keeping the rival families from tearing our territory apart. I am the boss now. Costa is a relic. If he wakes up, there will be a civil war. Make sure his brain activity stops, Doc, or I'll make sure yours does. Rosalie's blood ran cold. She was just a cleaner. She was drowning in debt with a dying brother. She had no business interfering in a mafia coup. But as she heard Nico's heavy footsteps walk away, she looked through the crack in the closet door at the man in the bed. He wasn't just a mob boss anymore. He was a human being about to be murdered in his sleep. A torrential downpour battered the reinforced windows of St. Jude's Medical Center, mirroring the turmoil churning inside Rosalie's chest. It was 2:15 a.m. She pushed her cart into room 1401, her hands trembling so violently that the mop handle rattled against the plastic bucket. The guards outside had been unusually dismissive, eagerly stepping away to watch a boxing match on a tablet down the hall. Rosalie knew what that meant. The coast had been cleared intentionally. She moved toward Harris's bed. He looked the same, pale, motionless, a ghost tethered to machines. I shouldn't be here, Rosalie whispered, her breath hitching. She had planned to quit, to run away, to hide her brother somewhere safe. But the memory of the bruise Mickey had left on her face and the realization that monsters like Nico Romano ruled this city had anchored her feet to the linoleum. Suddenly, the heavy door to the suite clicked shut and the deadbolt slid into place with a sickening thud. Rosalie froze. She looked around frantically, but the room offered little cover. In a blind panic, she dove behind the heavy floor-to-ceiling velvet curtains that draped the far window, pulling her legs tight against her chest. Footsteps approached the bed, slow, deliberate, and clicking with the expensive sound of leather dress shoes. "Look at you, Dom!" Nico's voice sneered, dripping with venom. Rosalie peeked through a tiny slit in the curtains. Nico was standing over the bed holding a sterile medical syringe filled with a clear liquid. The great king of Boston, reduced to pissing in a bag and breathing through a plastic straw. Nico tapped the syringe, flicking a small air bubble to the top. Harrison was too much of a coward to do it. Said potassium chloride leaves a trace if they do an autopsy. But who's going to order an autopsy on a dead vegetable? I'll comfort your sister at the funeral, Dom. Don't worry. Rosalie's heart hammered furiously against her ribs. Do something, her mind screamed. Scream, hit the alarm. But she was paralyzed. If Nico saw her, he would kill her instantly. Then he would find Leo. Nico uncapped the IV port on Harris's arm. Rest in peace, boss. As the needle hovered inches from the plastic port, a desperate, irrational instinct took over Rosalie. She couldn't fight a mafia underboss. She had no weapons. But she remembered the doctor's words. His brain lights up. He's trying to wake up. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face, and from behind the heavy curtains she began to sing. It wasn't a soft hum this time. It was loud, clear, and projected with all the raw agony in her soul. Sleep now, the shadows fall. Nico jolted, nearly dropping the syringe. He whipped his head around his hand, instinctively flying to the silenced pistol tucked into his waistband. "Who's there?" He barked, his eyes scanning the dimly lit room. Rosalie squeezed her eyes shut tighter, her voice trembling but refusing to stop. "The wolves are at the door, but the fire burns bright." "Show yourself!" Nico roared, stepping away from the bed, his gun drawn. He began advancing toward the shadows, moving away from Harris. In the dark void of his mind, the blinding golden light of the melody shattered the gray mist. Harris heard the words. He felt the sheer terror in the voice of the woman who had been his only comfort for weeks. The wolves were at the door. His door. Adrenaline dormant for 5 years violently flooded his nervous system. His brain flooded with synapses firing at lightning speed. Nico raised his gun, pointing it directly at the velvet curtains. He took another step, a cruel smile forming. "Found you, you little..." A sudden sharp gasp tore through the room, a wet, raspy inhalation of air that sounded like a man breaching the surface of the ocean. Nico spun back toward the bed. The heart monitor, which had been holding a steady 60 beats per minute, suddenly shrieked into a rapid, erratic tempo. The lines on the brain activity monitor spiked into a chaotic mountain range of green light. Harris Costa's eyes snapped open. They were bloodshot, unfocused, but burning with a ferocious primal fury. His chest heaved against the restraints ripping the tape securing the ventilator tube. Nico stepped back, his face draining of all color. No, impossible. Before Nico could raise his weapon, Harris's right arm, supposedly atrophied and useless, shot out with terrifying speed. His fingers trembling, but fueled by the sheer force of pure adrenaline, clamped around Nico's wrist with a vice-like grip, forcing the gun downward. Nico screamed in shock, trying to pull away, but Harris's grip was locked. Slowly, agonizingly, the Mafia Boss turned his head on the pillow, his dark eyes locked onto his treacherous underboss. Through the oxygen tube, a raspy metallic voice that hadn't been used in half a decade ground out a single word. Traitor. Behind the curtain, Rosalie collapsed to her knees, sobbing violently as the sounds of a scuffle broke out, followed immediately by the heavy oak doors being smashed open by the returning guards. The Silent King had awakened, and Boston was about to bleed. The heavy oak doors of room 1401 crashed open, splintering against the wall. Carmine and Polly burst into the suite, their weapons drawn, expecting an assassination. Instead, they walked into a tableau that defied every law of modern medicine. Their comatose boss, a man who had not moved a muscle in 5 years, was awake. He was half sitting up, his knuckles white as he clamped down on Nico Romano's wrist, forcing a suppressed pistol toward the floor. "What the hell is going on?" Carmine shouted, his gun trembling as he aimed it squarely at Nico's chest. "He's having a spasm," Nico lied, his voice cracking with a high-pitched edge of pure panic. He violently wrenched his arm back, finally breaking Harris's atrophied grip. Nico stumbled backward, breathless, pointing an accusatory finger at the bed. "His brain is misfiring. He grabbed me." Harris's chest heaved. Every breath was a jagged shard of glass tearing through his unpracticed lungs. The bright fluorescent lights of the hallway spilling into the room burned his unaccustomed eyes. He felt impossibly weak, his muscles screaming in agony just from the effort of moving his arm. But the mind behind those bloodshot eyes was sharp, calculating, and fueled by a volcanic rage. He looked at Carmine and Polly. They were foot soldiers, expendable, loyal only to the hand that signed their paychecks. Harris reached up with a trembling, bruised hand and ruthlessly tore the oxygen tube from his face. The heart monitor beeped in a panicked frenzy. "Carmine," Harris rasped. His voice sounded like two grinding stones, dry, hollow, yet carrying a chilling resonance that commanded the room. "Shoot, the traitor." Carmine froze. He looked at Harris, then at Nico, the man who had been running the syndicate for half a decade. The hierarchy of the Boston underworld was suddenly shattering in real time. Nico saw the hesitation. He knew the window of opportunity was closing. "You idiots, he's out of his mind. I'm the boss," Nico snarled, raising his weapon toward the bed. Before Nico could pull the trigger, a shadow detached itself from the hallway behind the guards. Matteo Russo, the Costa Syndicate's notoriously silent and lethal cleaner and Harris's oldest childhood friend, stepped into the doorway. Matteo had spent 5 years sidelined by Nico, waiting in the wings, praying for a miracle. Now he had one. Without a word, Matteo raised a sleek silver Beretta and fired. The silenced shot "phut" echoed sharply. The bullet grazed Nico's shoulder, tearing through his expensive suit jacket and splashing a crimson arc across the pristine wall. Nico screamed, dropping his weapon. Knowing he was outgunned and outmaneuvered, Nico shoved Carmine aside and bolted through the shattered doorway, disappearing into the chaotic labyrinth of the hospital corridors. "Let him run," Harris choked out, collapsing back onto the pillows, his energy entirely spent. "Matteo, lock the floor." "It's already done, Dom. Welcome back," Matteo said, his stoic face betraying a rare, faint smile as he holstered his weapon. He stepped further into the room, kicking Nico's discarded gun under the bed. But we have a problem. When Nico regroups, he's going to send an army to finish the job. This hospital is compromised. Harris nodded weakly. His eyes, however, were not on Mateo. They were fixed on the heavy velvet curtains drawn across the far window. "Bring her out," Harris commanded, raising a trembling finger toward the drapes. Mateo frowned, drawing his gun again. He approached the curtains and yanked them back. Rosalie shrieked, pressing herself into the corner of the windowsill, holding her squeaky yellow mop bucket like a shield. Her face was stained with tears, her scrubs completely drenched in cold sweat. She looked entirely out of place amidst the men with guns and the smell of fresh gunpowder. "A cleaner?" Mateo asked, utterly bewildered. "Dom, she witnessed the whole thing. She saw Nico. She saw me shoot him." In the Mafia, witnesses were liabilities, and liabilities were erased. Rosalie knew this. She had watched enough late-night crime documentaries with Leo to know that her life expectancy had just dropped to 0. "Please," Rosalie begged, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. "I didn't see anything. I swear, I was just hiding. I have a brother. He's sick. I can't die. Please." Harris's eyes softened just a fraction. He studied her. The baggy blue scrubs, the exhausted hazel eyes, the dark purple bruise blossoming along her cheekbone, a hallmark of desperation and violence that he recognized all too well. He didn't see a cleaner. He saw the voice, the golden thread that had pulled him from the abyss. "Mateo." Harris whispered, his chest barely rising. "Stand down." Mateo hesitated. "Boss, she's a civilian. If Nico knows she was in here." I said, "Stand down." Harris growled, a flicker of his old terrifying authority flaring in his eyes. He turned his gaze back to Rosalie. "Come here." Rosalie swallowed hard, her legs feeling like lead. She slowly lowered the bucket and stepped away from the window, keeping a terrified eye on Mateo's gun. She approached the side of the hospital bed, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Harris looked at her. He wanted to thank her. He wanted to ask her where she learned that lullaby. But his vision was swimming the edges of the room, turning a blurry, terrifying black. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the crushing reality of his atrophied body. "We need to move him," Mateo said, urgently checking his watch. "I have an armored transport downstairs. We're going to the Rhode Island compound." Harris fought to keep his eyes open. He looked at Rosalie. "You... come with us." "What?" Rosalie gasped, taking a step back. No, I can't. My brother's at home. My shift is almost over." "Nico saw you," Harris interrupted, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "He knows. You were in the room. He will find you. He will kill you. And your brother." Rosalie's blood ran cold. The image of Nico's cruel smile flashed in her mind. "Pack her up," Harris ordered Mateo, his eyelids finally drooping shut. "She is mine now." Before Rosalie could protest, before she could scream for the police, Mateo's firm hand clamped onto her shoulder. The Silent King had slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving Rosalie bound to a world she never wanted any part of. The Costa family's Rhode Island safe house was less of a house and more of a heavily militarized fortress. Tucked away on a private rocky peninsula, the sprawling stone mansion was surrounded by electrified fences and patrolled by men carrying automatic rifles. For 3 days, Rosalie had been a prisoner in a gilded cage. She was given a luxurious guest room adjacent to the master suite, filled with expensive clothes she refused to wear and catered food she couldn't stomach. Every time she tried to leave, a polite but immovable guard redirected her back inside. Her only solace and her greatest source of anxiety was her forced proximity to Harris Costa. Harris's recovery was a grueling, ugly process. A private medical team completely off the books and intensely loyal to Mateo had been smuggled into the compound to oversee his rehabilitation. The great boss of Boston was forced to endure hours of agonizing physical therapy just to regain the ability to sit up unassisted. The frustration was eating him alive. Rosalie was required to be in his room during these sessions. Harris had explicitly ordered it. When the pain became too much, when the humiliation of his weakened state caused him to lash out and hurl a glass of water at the wall, Harris would demand the room be cleared. Only Rosalie was allowed to stay. He never asked her to sing. He didn't have to. The moment the doors closed and the silence threatened to drown him again, Rosalie would sit in the corner chair, pull her knees to her chest, and hum the Celtic lullaby. It was a bizarre, unspoken ritual. The melody was the only thing that could tame the devil's rage. On the fourth night, the silence shattered. Rosalie was sitting by the roaring fireplace in Harris's vast bedroom. Harris was awake, propped up against a mountain of pillows, his dark eyes staring intensely at her. The color was slowly returning to his face, and the sharp aristocratic lines of his jaw were becoming more pronounced. He looked dangerous again. "Why do you have that bruise on your face?" Harris asked suddenly. His voice was stronger now, the raspy metallic edge giving way to a smooth, dark baritone. Rosalie flinched instinctively, touching her cheek. The yellowing bruise from Mickey the loan shark was fading, but the memory still stung. "It's nothing. I fell. I've spent my entire life dealing in violence, Rosalie," Harris said coldly. "I know what a fist looks like when it meets bone." "Who hit you?" Rosalie looked away, staring into the flames. "It doesn't matter. You're holding me hostage here. My brother needs me. He's going to run out of his medication by tomorrow. If you really want to thank me for saving your life, let me go." "I am protecting you," Harris countered, shifting slightly, wincing as his stiff muscles protested. "Nico's men are tearing Boston apart looking for me. If they find you, they will torture you to find out where I am." "Then let me bring Leo here." Rosalie snapped, her temper finally overriding her fear. She stood up, her fists clenched. "He has end-stage renal failure. He needs dialysis. He needs his sister. You have all this money, all this power, and you're keeping me here like some human sound machine." Harris remained silent for a long moment. He studied the fiery defiance in her hazel eyes. He was used to people cowering before him, agreeing with his every word. Rosalie's outburst was entirely foreign to him and strangely intoxicating. "Tell me about the debt," Harris said quietly. Rosalie blinked, thrown off by the shift in his tone. "What? The bruise, the hospital job. You're drowning Rosalie. Tell me who holds your leash." The fight drained out of Rosalie, replaced by a crushing wave of exhaustion. She collapsed back into the chair, burying her face in her hands. "His name is Mickey Sullivan. I owe him $80,000. I took it out to pay for Leo's first round of treatments. The interest, I can never pay it back. He said if I don't have 10 grand by Friday, he's going to take it out on Leo." A dark, lethal shadow passed over Harris's face. Mickey Sullivan. A mid-level thug running a predatory lending operation in the South End. A man who technically operated under the Costa family's umbrella. Under Nico's umbrella. Harris reached over to the bedside table and pressed a silver intercom button. "Mateo." Less than 10 seconds later, the heavy bedroom door opened and Mateo stepped in. "Boss, locate Mickey Sullivan in the South End." Harris ordered, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Bring him to the warehouse by the docks. And Mateo, yes, Dom, take everything in his safe, every dime, and find a boy named Leo Jenkins. Transport him to the private wing at Mass General. Put him on the VIP list for a kidney transplant. Pay whatever it takes to move him to the top of the list." Rosalie gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. She stared at Harris, utterly paralyzed with shock. Mateo didn't blink. "Consider it done." He nodded and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't oppressive. It was heavy with anticipation. "Why?" Rosalie whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Why would you do that?" Harris slowly turned his head to look at her. The vulnerability in his gaze was something no one in his syndicate had ever seen. "Because you were the only light in the dark," Harris said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur. "For 5 years, I was buried alive. You pulled me out. Your brother will never want for anything again. His medical bills are paid. Mickey Sullivan will never breathe in your direction again. I will give you the world, Rosalie." Rosalie's heart hammered against her ribs. The sheer magnitude of his promise was terrifying. What? What do I have to do in return? Harris's eyes darkened, a possessive fire igniting in their depths. You stay. You stay by my side until I am strong enough to take back my city. You become my shadow, and when the time comes to face Nico, you will stand beside the king. It was a devil's bargain. She was selling her soul to the most dangerous man in Boston. But as Rosalie thought of Leo safe in a pristine hospital room, free from the terror of Mickey's thugs, she knew there was only one answer. "Okay," Rosalie whispered, stepping closer to the bed, the flames of the fireplace reflecting in her tear-filled eyes. "I'll stay." Harris Costa allowed a genuine predatory smile to touch his lips. The invisible girl was now his queen in the making. And Nico Romano was a dead man walking. The air in the abandoned shipping warehouse on the edge of Boston's Seaport District was thick with the scent of brine rust and raw fear. Mickey Sullivan, a man who had built his miserable reputation on terrorizing single mothers and desperate families, was currently suspended by his wrists from a heavy iron chain, his feet barely scraping the damp concrete floor. He was bleeding from a split lip, his chest heaving as he stared at the impeccably dressed man standing before him. Matteo Russo did not look like a torturer, clad in a bespoke charcoal suit checking the time on a heavy platinum Rolex. Daytona Matteo looked like a Wall Street executive waiting for a late cab. "I don't know what you want," Mickey sobbed, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I pay my kickbacks to Nico every month on the dot. You got the wrong guy." Matteo slowly looked up from his watch. He walked over to a metal folding table that held a single item, a black leather briefcase. He clicked it open, revealing stacks of $100 bills. $80,000, Matteo said softly, his voice devoid of any human warmth, plus $10,000 for the predatory interest you demanded by Friday. "Is this the sum owed to you by Rosalie Jenkins?" Mickey's eyes widened in confusion, then sheer terror. The name dropped like an anvil. Jenkins, the cleaning girl. "Look, I didn't know she was connected. I swear on my mother's grave. If she's with you guys, the debt is forgiven. Keep the cash, just let me down." Matteo closed the briefcase. "The debt is not forgiven, Mickey. The debt is paid. The Costa family always pays its debts." Matteo stepped closer, drawing a sleek black combat knife from his jacket. However, Harris Costa is awake, and he was highly displeased to learn that a parasite operating under his syndicate's umbrella laid a hand on something that belongs to him. The money is yours, but the hand you used to strike Rosalie Jenkins, that belongs to the king. Mickey's screams were abruptly swallowed by the roar of a passing freight train, dissolving into the cold Boston night. 70 miles south in the Rhode Island safe house, Rosalie sat on the edge of her plush king-sized bed, staring at the screen of a secured iPad. On the other end of the encrypted video call was her brother Leo. He was sitting up in a pristine, sunlit private suite at Massachusetts General Hospital. He looked exhausted, but the sickly gray pallor that usually haunted his skin was gone. He was hooked up to a state-of-the-art dialysis machine, and a nurse in the background was arranging a vase of fresh orchids. "Rosalie, it's crazy," Leo was saying, his eyes wide with disbelief. "They moved me to the VIP floor. The head of transplant surgery came in himself. He said a donor match was found in Chicago, and they're flying the kidney in tonight. They said an anonymous benefactor covered everything." "Rosalie, what did you do? Who are these people you're working for?" Rosalie swallowed the massive lump in her throat, forcing a bright, reassuring smile. It's a specialized private care firm, Leo. I got a major promotion. They take care of their employees. Just focus on your surgery, okay? I love you so much. I love you too. Come see me soon. As soon as I can, Rosalie promised, her voice cracking slightly before she ended the call. She dropped the iPad onto the mattress and buried her face in her hands, letting out a long, shuddering breath. Relief, profound and dizzying, washed over her. Her brother was going to live, but the cost of his life was her own freedom. She was now tethered to the underworld, a fragile butterfly caught in a web woven by predators. A soft knock on the adjoining door pulled her from her thoughts. She wiped her eyes and opened it. Harris was sitting in a heavy leather armchair by the fire, breathing heavily. His physical therapist had just left. The grueling sessions were taking their toll, but the results were undeniable. In just a week, Harris had transformed from a bedridden ghost to a man who commanded the room. He was wearing loose dark sweatpants and a plain white t-shirt that clung to his broad chest. For the first time, Rosalie noticed the intricate dark tattoos peeking out from his collarbone and the thick, jagged scar running down his left forearm, remnants of a life steeped in violence. "He is safe?" Harris asked. He didn't need to specify who. "Yes," Rosalie said softly, stepping into the room. "The surgery is tonight. Thank you. I don't know how to ever repay you." Harris's dark eyes locked onto hers, burning with an intensity that made her pulse flutter. "You already did. Come here." Rosalie hesitated, then crossed the room, stopping a few feet from his chair. "Closer," he murmured. She took another step until she was standing right in front of him. Harris reached out his large, warm hand, wrapping gently around her wrist. His touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to her heart. He slowly pulled her down until she was sitting on the edge of the heavy oak coffee table facing him. He reached up his thumb, lightly brushing the fading yellow bruise on her cheekbone. His touch was devastatingly gentle, a stark contrast to the ruthless man who had ordered a hit from his hospital bed. "Mickey Sullivan has been dealt with," Harris said, his voice a low rumble. "No one will ever hurt you again, Rosalie. That is not a promise. That is a blood oath." Rosalie trembled, leaning into his touch almost involuntarily. "I've spent my whole life being invisible, cleaning up after people who wouldn't even look at me. Why me? Why does a song make me so important to you? Because in a world full of monsters, your voice was the only human thing left." Harris replied, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. "For 5 years, I was trapped in a cage of ice. You didn't just sing a lullaby, Rosalie. You shattered the ice. You're the only real thing in my life." He leaned forward, the distance between them evaporating. Rosalie's breath hitched. She could smell the crisp scent of cedar and expensive soap on his skin. She knew she should pull away. He was a mafia boss, a criminal, a man who ordered executions. But as his lips brushed against hers, soft, searching, and filled with a desperate, aching hunger, all her logic crumbled. She closed her eyes and kissed him back. It was a kiss forged in darkness, but desperate for the light, a clash of two entirely different worlds colliding in the quiet sanctuary of the Rhode Island coast. For a fleeting moment, there was no mafia, no Nico, no debt. Just a king finding his crown and the invisible girl who handed it to him. But in the Costa family, peace was merely the brief silence before the explosion. The Boston syndicate was bleeding. In the opulent glass-walled penthouse of the Omni Parker house, Nico Romano hurled a crystal tumbler of scotch against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces, the amber liquid staining the custom silk wallpaper. "What do you mean you lost them?" Nico roared, his face purple with rage. Carmine and Polly stood rigidly near the heavy mahogany doors, practically shaking in their custom Italian shoes. "Boss, we had eyes on every Costa safe house in Massachusetts." Carmine stammered, swallowing hard. "But Matteo, he's a ghost. He used a dummy ambulance, swapped vehicles in a tunnel, and completely vanished. And now Mickey Sullivan was found down by the docks. He's alive, but he's missing his right hand, boss. Mateo left a message carved into Mickey's chest. "The king is awake." Nico gripped the edges of his marble desk, his knuckles turning stark white. Fear, cold and absolute, began to gnaw at his insides. Harris wasn't just awake, he was orchestrating strikes, and Nico knew better than anyone the sheer terrifying intellect of the man he had tried to assassinate. "Harris is weak," Nico growled, trying to convince himself as much as his men. "He's been a vegetable for 5 years. He can't even walk unassisted. He's vulnerable right now. We find him and we finish the job before he rallies the other families." "But how?" Paulie asked nervously. Mateo wiped their digital footprint. "We have nothing." Nico's eyes narrowed into dark slits as a wicked, desperate idea formed in his mind. He walked over to the sprawling window overlooking the Boston skyline. "The cleaner," Nico said slowly. "The girl?" Carmine asked. "What about her?" "She was terrified, desperate. People like that leave trails. They have attachments." Nico sneered, turning back to his men. "Find out who she is. Hack the hospital employment records. I want her name or address and every single person she gives a damn about. Harris took her with him because she saw my face. She is his weak link. Find what she loves and we will find them." It took Nico's cyberfixers less than 12 hours to pull Rosalie's life apart. By the following afternoon, Nico had a name, a mountain of debt records, and most importantly, a transfer request from St. Jude's to Massachusetts General Hospital for a patient named Leo Jenkins. Nico dispatched a 6-man hit squad to Mass General only to find the VIP floor locked down by heavily armed men bearing the Costa family insignia. Harris had anticipated the move. Leo was untouchable. But Nico was a cornered rat, and rats are most dangerous when they have no way out. If he couldn't use the brother, he would use the money trail. He tracked the massive anonymous surgical payment made to Mass General back through a labyrinth of shell companies, eventually catching a single microscopic slip-up by one of Mateo's offshore bankers. An IP ping traced back to an encrypted router in a coastal town in Rhode Island. Midnight. The storm that battered the Rhode Island coastline was biblical. Thunder rattled the heavy stone foundations of the safe house, and torrential rain lashed against the reinforced glass. Inside, the atmosphere was quietly tense. Harris was standing in the center of the drawing room, completely unsupported. His legs trembled slightly, sweat beading on his forehead, but he was standing. Rosalie watched from the sofa, her hands clasped tightly together, a proud, awestruck smile on her face. 3 minutes, Mateo announced, holding a stopwatch leaning against the doorframe. "That's a new record, boss." Harris took a slow, agonizing step forward, his jaw locked in concentration. "I don't need a stopwatch, Mateo. I need my city back. How soon can we move?" "The doctors say another week. Tomorrow," Harris interrupted, taking another step. "We leave tomorrow night. Nico is disorganized, but he isn't stupid. He will eventually—" The compound's perimeter alarm never sounded. The first sign of the breach was the heavy, deafening crack of a high-caliber sniper rifle echoing over the thunder. The massive bay window of the drawing room shattered inward, raining thick shards of safety glass across the Persian rug. Mateo reacted with terrifying speed. He tackled Harris to the floor just as a second bullet tore through the space where the boss's chest had been a millisecond prior, burying itself into the stone fireplace. "Get down!" Mateo roared over the howling wind, drawing his weapon. Rosalie screamed, throwing herself behind the heavy oak sofa, her hands clamped over her ears. The sound of automatic gunfire erupted from the front lawn. The safehouse guards were returning fire, but the element of surprise had devastated their ranks. "They cut the hard lines," Mateo shouted, checking his phone. "Jamming the cell signals, too. It's a full assault team, heavy ordnance." Harris pushed himself up against the base of the fireplace. The physical exertion of standing had already drained him, but the adrenaline of war, his natural element, was pumping violently through his veins. He looked at Rosalie, who was curled into a ball, shaking uncontrollably. "Mateo, give me a gun!" Harris demanded, his voice slicing through the chaos. "Boss, you can barely stand. Give me the damn gun," Harris roared. Mateo slid a sleek Glock 19 across the hardwood floor. Harris caught it seamlessly, checking the magazine with practiced lethal efficiency. He crawled over to Rosalie, ignoring the searing pain in his atrophied muscles. He grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Her hazel eyes were wide with sheer terror. "Rosalie, listen to me," Harris said, his voice an anchor in the storm. "I am not going to let them touch you. Do you understand? But you have to move. Mateo is going to take you down to the subterranean garage. There's an armored SUV. You get in and you don't look back." "No," Rosalie cried, grabbing his shirt. "I'm not leaving you. You can't fight them like this. They'll kill you. I am Harris Costa." He said, his eyes burning with a dark, unyielding fire. "I died 5 years ago. I'm not doing it again today." A thunderous explosion rocked the front of the house. The heavy oak front doors blew off their hinges, splintering into the grand foyer. The attackers were inside. "Go!" Harris shoved her toward Mateo. "Mateo, get her out. If she dies, I will execute you myself." Mateo grabbed Rosalie by the waist, practically dragging her toward the hidden servant staircase at the back of the room. Rosalie fought him, screaming Harris's name, but Mateo's grip was like iron. As they disappeared down the dark stairwell, Harris propped himself up against the edge of the shattered window frame. He raised the Glock with a steady, unflinching hand. He heard the heavy tactical boots of Nico's hit squad storming down the hallway toward the drawing room. He was outgunned. He was physically shattered. But as the first masked mercenary stepped into the doorway, raising an assault rifle, Harris didn't feel fear. He felt the phantom echo of a Celtic lullaby, a melody of fire and wolves, reminding him exactly why he needed to survive. Harris pulled the trigger. The war for Boston had officially begun. The first mercenary stepped into the doorway of the drawing room, his tactical rifle raised, expecting to find a panicked, defenseless cripple. Instead, he met the dead-eyed gaze of the Devil of Boston. Harris didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger of the Glock 19 twice in rapid succession. Crack! Crack! Both hollow-point rounds took the mercenary square in the chest, punching right through his Kevlar vest. The man crumpled backward into the hallway, his weapon clattering uselessly against the hardwood. 1. Harris counted under his breath, his chest heaving as the recoil sent a shockwave of agony up his weakened arm. Footsteps thundered outside the door. They knew where he was now. Harris dragged himself behind the heavy, overturned mahogany desk, using it as a barricade. His muscles screamed in protest, his lungs burning as if he were inhaling shattered glass. For 5 years, his body had forgotten the chaotic, violent rhythm of warfare, but his mind, sharpened by decades of surviving the ruthless Boston underworld, was as brilliant and calculating as ever. 2 more masked men breached the room, fanning out. Harris waited for the lightning flash from the storm outside to blind their night vision goggles for a fraction of a second. In that microscopic window of opportunity, he leaned out. He fired 3 times. The man on the left dropped instantly, a bullet tearing through his throat. The second man returned fire, sending a hail of bullets tearing through the mahogany desk, raining wood splinters over Harris's head. Harris hissed in pain as a sharp shard of wood sliced his cheek, but he didn't duck. He rolled to the right, exposing himself just long enough to put a round directly through the visor of the remaining shooter. The room fell silent save for the howling wind and the torrential rain pouring through the shattered bay windows. But Harris knew this was only the vanguard. His vision was beginning to blur, black spots dancing at the edges of his sight. He had pushed his recovering body past its absolute limits. If he didn't move now, he would die in this room. Meanwhile, deep beneath the estate in the subterranean concrete garage, Mateo and Rosalie were fighting their own desperate battle. Mateo shoved Rosalie behind a massive concrete support pillar just as a barrage of gunfire sparked against the walls. Nico's men had anticipated their escape route. 3 heavily armed hitmen were fanned out across the garage, blocking their path to the armored Cadillac Escalade parked in the center of the bay. "Stay down, Rosalie!" Matteo yelled over the deafening echoes popping out from behind cover to fire his Beretta. He clipped one of the shooters in the shoulder, but a returning burst of automatic fire caught Matteo in the thigh. Matteo let out a sharp grunt of pain, collapsing onto the cold, oily concrete. His gun slid out of his hand, skidding a few feet away. He clamped a hand over his bleeding leg, gritting his teeth as the hitmen began to slowly advance their lasers, cutting through the dim, flickering fluorescent light. "We got the cleaner." One of the men sneered, his voice echoing off the concrete. "Nico wants her alive, but the bodyguard is done." Behind the pillar, Rosalie squeezed her eyes shut. Her entire body was shaking, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "This is it," she thought. "I'm going to die here." She thought of Leo waking up in the hospital with his new kidney waiting for a sister who would never arrive. She thought of Harris bleeding out upstairs to buy her time. No, the absolute refusal to be a victim, the same fiery defiance that had kept her going through years of poverty and loan sharks, suddenly ignited in her chest. She opened her eyes. To her left, mounted on the wall, was a massive heavy-duty industrial fire extinguisher. At her feet lay Matteo's discarded Beretta. She didn't know how to shoot, but she knew how to clean house. Rosalie crawled forward, her hands scraping against the rough concrete, and grabbed the Beretta. She didn't aim at the men. She knew she would miss. Instead, she aimed the gun directly at the pressurized fire extinguisher mounted on the wall right beside the advancing hitmen. She pulled the trigger. The bullet struck the red metal cylinder. It didn't just pierce it, it caused a violent explosive rupture. A massive, blinding white cloud of pressurized chemical foam erupted into the garage with the force of a bomb, completely engulfing the 3 hitmen in a suffocating, blinding fog. "My eyes, I can't see!" one of them screamed blindly, firing his weapon into the ceiling. Matteo didn't waste the opportunity. Fighting through the agonizing pain in his leg, he drew a backup combat knife from his boot, lunged into the thick white cloud, and neutralized the blinded threats with lethal, silent precision. When the foam began to settle, Matteo limped back toward Rosalie. His suit ruined, his hands covered in blood. He looked at the terrified girl holding the empty gun, a look of profound respect crossing his stoic face. "Nice shot, kid," Matteo breathed heavily. Before Rosalie could respond, the heavy steel door leading to the upstairs stairwell banged open. Rosalie raised the empty gun in a panic, but lowered it instantly as a shadow stumbled into the garage. It was Harris. He was covered in dust and blood, leaning heavily against the doorframe, his chest heaving. He looked at the bodies on the floor, then at Matteo, and finally at Rosalie. A faint, bloody smile touched his lips. "I told you. I wasn't dying today," Harris rasped. Matteo threw Rosalie the keys to the Escalade. "Drive, Rosalie. Get in the driver's seat." Rosalie didn't argue. She sprinted to the armored SUV, starting the massive engine as Matteo practically dragged Harris into the back seat. As Rosalie slammed her foot on the gas, the Escalade roared to life, smashing through the reinforced garage doors and tearing out into the stormy Rhode Island night, leaving the burning safe house and Nico's failed assassination attempt in the rearview mirror. In the back seat, Harris leaned his head against the blood-stained leather, his eyes locking onto Rosalie in the rearview mirror. "Nico crossed the point of no return," Harris whispered, his voice cold as the grave. "Take us to Boston, Rosalie. It's time to end this." 48 hours later, the private soundproof dining room at the back of the historic Algonquin Club in Boston's Back Bay was thick with the smell of expensive cigar smoke and simmering tension. Seated around the massive oak table were the 5 capos of the New England syndicates, the old guard who remembered the bloody patriarch of family wars and the brutal reign of the Winter Hill Gang. At the head of the table sat Nico Romano. He was dressed in a sharp, immaculate white suit, a confident smirk plastered across his face. "Channer the Brun." "Gentlemen," Nico said, raising a crystal glass of scotch. I know the rumors have been swirling, but I have verified it myself. 2 nights ago, the Rhode Island estate burned to the ground. Harris Costa is dead. Matteo Russo is dead. It is a tragic end to a great era, but business must continue. I am officially stepping up as head of the family. Those who stand with me will see their territories expand. Those who don't will be replaced. A heavy silence fell over the room. The capos exchanged uneasy glances. Carmine and Paulie stood guarding the doors, their hands resting on their holsters, ensuring no one dared object. To the new boss, one of the older capos finally muttered reluctantly, raising his glass. Before the glasses could clink, the heavy oak doors of the dining room didn't just open, they were violently kicked off their heavy brass hinges. Carmine and Paulie didn't even have time to draw their weapons. 2 suppressed shots rang out and both guards dropped to their knees screaming as bullets shattered their kneecaps. Matteo Russo stepped into the room leaning slightly on a cane, his gun smoking. Nico froze, the color completely draining from his face. His glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the polished hardwood floor. The capos leapt from their chairs, shouting in shock, but they immediately froze as a second figure stepped out from the shadows of the hallway and into the light of the chandelier. Harris Costa. He was wearing a bespoke midnight black suit. He moved slowly, his posture rigid, relying heavily on a silver-handled cane, but his presence commanded the room like a localized hurricane. The Devil of Boston was not a ghost. He was flesh-blood and sheer terrifying authority. "Sit down," Harris said softly. Not a single capo hesitated. They all dropped back into their chairs, staring in absolute awe. Nico began to tremble, backing away from the table. "Dom, boss, it's a miracle. The rumors said you were dead. I was holding the family together until we knew for sure." Harris ignored him. He walked slowly around the edge of the table, his dark eyes fixed on Nico. "You thought you were a wolf, Nico, but wolves protect the pack. You're just a stray dog begging for scraps." "Dom, please," Nico cried out, his bravado entirely shattered. He looked at the capos. "He's weak, he's crippled, shoot him." None of the men moved a muscle. They knew true power when they saw it. Harris stopped 3 feet from Nico. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a single crumpled hospital record. It was the order Nico had signed 5 years ago, bribing Dr. Harrison to suppress Harris's brain activity. He threw the paper onto the table for the capos to see. 5 years you kept me in a cage," Harris whispered, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. "You stole my life. You stole my city. And then you tried to take the one thing that pulled me out of the dark." Nico, realizing he had absolutely nothing left to lose, let out a primal scream and lunged forward, reaching for the snub-nosed revolver tucked into his waistband. Harris didn't even flinch. Before Nico's gun could clear its holster, Harris whipped the heavy silver head of his cane across Nico's jaw with sickening force. Nico collapsed to the floor, spitting blood and teeth. Harris stood over him, drawing Matteo's Beretta from his own waistband. He pointed it directly between Nico's terrified eyes. "This is for the 5 years of silence," Harris said coldly. The gunshot echoed through the Algonquin Club, signaling the indisputable bloody return of the king. 1 week later, Massachusetts General Hospital. The afternoon sun streamed through the wide windows of the VIP recovery wing. Rosalie sat in a comfortable chair beside her brother's bed. Leo was sitting up, laughing, color fully restored to his cheeks as he ate from a cup of expensive hospital pudding. The kidney transplant had been a complete miraculous success. "I still can't believe it, Rosalie," Leo said, shaking his head. "The nurses said the benefactor covered my anti-rejection meds for the rest of my life. I feel normal." "You are normal." "Leo." Rosalie smiled, tears of joy welling in her eyes. "You're going to have a beautiful, long life." A soft knock on the door made them both turn. Harris Costa walked into the room. He was out of the dark suits, wearing a casual cashmere sweater and dark jeans. He still used the cane, but he walked with a newfound strength, the shadow of death completely lifted from his aristocratic features. He held a massive bouquet of vibrant white orchids. Leo's eyes went wide. He had seen the news over the past week, the mysterious restructuring of Boston's elite, the sudden disappearance of Nico Romano. He recognized the man standing in the doorway. "Rosalie," Leo whispered, stunned. "Is that—" "Leo, this is Harris," Rosalie said softly, a deep blush rising to her cheeks as she stood up. He's the one who helped us." Harris approached the bed, setting the flowers on the nightstand. He looked at the young boy, his expression remarkably gentle. "It is an honor to finally meet you, Leo. Your sister has told me a great deal about you. You saved my life, Mr. Costa." Leo stammered, completely starstruck. "No," Harris corrected, turning his intense dark gaze to Rosalie, reaching out to gently take her hand. "Your sister saved mine. I'm just returning the favor." Rosalie intertwined her fingers with his. He wasn't the devil of Boston to her. He wasn't a ruthless king. He was the man who had kept his promise, the man who had pulled her out of her own invisible prison, just as she had pulled him from his coma. As Harris led Rosalie out into the hallway, leaving Leo to rest, he pulled her close, wrapping his arms securely around her waist. "The city is quiet," Harris murmured, kissing the top of her head. "Mickey is gone. Nico is gone. There is no more debt, Rosalie. You are free." Rosalie looked up at him, her hazel eyes shining with absolute certainty. She reached up gently, tracing the jagged scar on his cheek. "I don't want to be free of you, Harris," she whispered. "I want to stay." Harris smiled, a rare, breathtaking smile that reached his dark eyes. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a deep, passionate kiss, right there in the pristine hospital corridor. The silent king had found his voice, and the invisible cleaner had found her crown. Together, they walked out into the bright Boston afternoon, the faint haunting melody of an old Celtic lullaby echoing softly in their hearts, a testament to the fire that had finally conquered the dark. And that concludes the incredible, heart-stopping story of In a Coma for 5 years, the Mafia Boss only woke up when the poor cleaner sang a lullaby. What an explosive finale! Did you expect Rosalie to be the ultimate hero in the garage, or Harris's ruthless revenge at the Algonquin Club? I would love to hear your favorite twist down below. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button, share the video with your friends who love mafia romance and intense drama. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another epic real-life story. See you in the next one.